Shalom, and welcome to Psychology of the Parsha for Parshat Vayeishev. In this Parsha, it tells us how Vayeishev Yaakov be'eretz Megurei Aviv. Yaakov, finally, after everything he's been through, all the trials and tribulations, he settles down. He's trying to have a peaceful life, enjoy his family, enjoy his spiritual life, enjoy the material things that he has. And then, sadly, the story of Yosef creeps up on him. Now in this story, which of course the gist of it is that Yosef was unliked by the brothers, they sold him as a slave, he ends up in Egypt, and the end of the story is, of course, in a week or two, we find out how Yaakov and his sons end up in Egypt, and thus begins the enslavement of the Jewish people. But like I always stress, the Torah is not just relating to us a certain narrative in history. The Torah gives us various details at different times, and each of that detail in itself is an entire lesson. Each in every even minute nuance of a detail can give us entire lessons in how to live our life, both bein Adam lamakom, between man and his creator, meaning between man and God, and then most importantly, bein Adam lachavero, between man and his contemporary, between one person and another, the relations between people. I want to zoom in on the verse that describes to us how Yosef, because he was so loved by his father, because his father spent all this time with him, studying with him, more so than the other brothers, he was of course what we call the Ben Skunim, he was born in his old age, or as we know, he was so similar. He was a striking resemblance of Yaakov, thus he was the same kind of character, the same type of person, and thus Yaakov gravitated towards him. But it says, Vayisnu'u oto, his brothers did not like him. The word the verse uses is they hated him. They despised him. But then it adds something. And it says, Velo yachlu dabro lishalom. They could not speak to him in peace. They could not speak to him a friendly word. Now I ask you, if I tell you that someone hates somebody, I say, this person hates this person, this other person. Well, it's obvious that they don't speak to him in any friendly manner because they're not friendly to them, they don't like them. Or, even stronger, as the verse says, it's not that they didn't like them, they weren't their best friend, you weren't his best friend. Vayisnu'u oto, and they hated him, they despised him. So it's kind of obvious, it goes without saying, that they didn't speak to him in peace. They didn't have, nice little conversations with him. They had no interest in engaging with him. They didn't like him. So why add this detail? It seems to be superfluous. Rashi comments something very interesting. That we see that even in their Ginai, even when the Torah describes their bad traits, even when the Torah has to give us the true narrative and include the negative and the ugly, that they didn't get along, yet the Torah makes a point to tell us their virtue. Namely, that they were not echad bepeh, echad belev. They were not, as the Talmud describes, one thing in their mouth, and one thing in their heart. Meaning, they said what they meant, and they meant what they said. They really, because they didn't like him, they didn't give him any false pretense. They didn't, color their words and make it sound like they're his friend and behind his back speak negatively about him. The way they felt, the way they truly felt, that's the way they communicated. Doesn't mean necessarily they walked around screaming at him or telling him off or worse, even, degrading him in any way. But the fact is, they didn't use any false pretense in their words when talking to him. They were very direct, and they kept it perhaps neutral, not overly brotherly. This is a very important thing, because really if you ask yourself, and the truth is we live in a world today when most people, you don't really know what's in their heart. Of course we can never know what's in a person's heart. But what really is in their mind? What does a person really think about me? Is what they're saying what they think about me? Sadly, most of the time, the encounters we have with people leaves us more in doubt than in certainty as to how that person feels about us, what that person said, what they really mean, what they could have meant, what they should have meant, so on and so forth. You know, it's interesting that even though the argument can be made, come on, big deal, make the guy feel good. He's your brother, so you don't like him, so you don't get along. But why not just, kind of sugarcoat the relationship and make it look like you're friends? Well, this tells us the level of integrity of their midat ha'emet, their attribute, their midah of truth, of integrity. They did not compromise. Their style of speech was one that you said exactly what you meant. If you're going to say it, you're going to say exactly what you mean. You don't have to go out and tell somebody something negative. But to not camouflage and twist and whitewash what you mean, that was their trait. They could not do that. We develop a style of talking. Just an interesting anecdote, something that happened in the yeshiva in Lubavitch, in the actual famed yeshiva, Tomchei Tmimim in Lubavitch. There was a certain student who later became famous as a great chassid, who was from the city of Nevel. Nevel was a very, very chassidish shtat, a very chassidic city, well known. The people there had a certain style of speech. And one time, I guess he was being reprimanded, he was being told off, and he remarked, he said, cushion, not going to say it in English. Of course, that was grounds for immediate expulsion from the yeshiva. And in fact, the menahel, the actual executive director who later became the previous Rebbe, wanted to expel him from yeshiva. Imagine such chutzpah, to speak to a superior, to speak to a staff member like that. When he went to consult with his father, who was ultimately the founder, the dean of the yeshiva, that was the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe said to him, one moment, where's he from? He's from Nevel. He didn't mean anything. That's the way they talk. Or another version is, for them, that's a good morning. In other words, that's an inherent style of speech. He really did not mean anything negative. He didn't mean what somebody else would have meant. What I'm trying to portray here, what I'm trying to illustrate is the idea that we develop a way of talking. And the way we are developed, the way we are accustomed to speak, that really says who we are. And the brothers were so strongly midat ha'emet, the attribute of truth, of integrity, that they could not bring themselves, even for the sake of brotherhood, to speak falsely. If they didn't say anything negative, but they're not going to sugarcoat that which is not positive. And that's a tremendous lesson for us. Shalom.